The Hall of 10,000 Stars was the most beautiful place in the known universe. And Ambassador Alara Vance hated every inch of it right now. She stood alone on the speaking platform. A small human woman surrounded by holographic projections of the galaxy's most powerful beings. The 12 elder species who had ruled the stars for millions of years before humanity had even learned to make fire above her. The Vethkari delegate floated in his anti-gravity field, his 4 eyes blinking in slow patterns that showed his boredom. Beside him, the crystalline form of High Arbiter Thesan caught the light and scattered it into rainbows that would have been beautiful if Alara was not so angry. And in the shadows at the back of the chamber, the ancient Ulmori elder sat in silence, watching everything with eyes that had seen the birth and death of countless civilizations. "The data is clear," Alara said, her voice steady even as her hands shook behind her back. "The Morvathi homeworld has 3 billion people on it, and their sun is dying. We have 40 cycles before it collapses completely. 40 cycles to save an entire species from extinction." She waved her hand, and the datasphere behind her came to life. It showed the Kepler-22 system in terrible detail. The star at its center was swollen and red, pulsing with unstable energy that grew worse with each passing hour. And there, orbiting that dying sun, was a small blue world filled with people who had done nothing wrong except exist in the wrong place at the wrong time. 3 billion lives, Alara repeated, letting the number hang in the air. Mothers and fathers and children, artists and scientists and farmers. An entire civilization with thousands of years of history, and they will all die unless we act. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then High Arbiter Thesan spoke, his voice like wind chimes in a cold breeze. "Ambassador Vance, the Council has reviewed your proposal with great care. We understand your emotional attachment to this situation, but the mathematics simply do not support intervention." Emotional attachment? Alara felt her face grow hot. This is not about emotion. This is about basic decency. The Vethkari Consortium has calculated the resource cost, the 4-eyed delegate announced, his tone flat and uncaring. To mount a rescue operation of this scale would require 700 vessels, 2 million tons of emergency supplies, and the cooperation of at least 4 member species. The economic impact would destabilize 3 trade sectors for a minimum of 12 cycles. "So you are saying their lives are not worth the money?" "We are saying the mathematics do not favor action," the Vethkari replied. As if he was discussing the weather and not the death of billions, Alara turned to the Solicarans, the species known throughout the galaxy for their computational abilities. Hoping they might see reason, what about a stellar stabilization attempt? D.I. Tanaka on Earth has been working on gravitational manipulation theories that could. "We have reviewed the human scientist's work," the Solicaran delegate interrupted, their mechanical voice buzzing through the translation matrix. "The probability of success is less than 4%. The probability of total mission failure, resulting in loss of all rescue vessels, is 67%. These numbers do not justify the risk. 4% is not 0%. It is close enough to 0 that the distinction becomes meaningless." Alara wanted to scream. She wanted to grab these ancient, powerful beings and shake them until they understood what they were saying. But she forced herself to stay calm. To try one more time, she turned to the Ulmori elder, the oldest being in the room, a creature that had existed for so long that even the other elder species treated it with respect. "Honored elder, your people have seen more of the universe than anyone. Surely you understand that we cannot simply let an entire species die when we have the power to help them." The Ulmori elder was silent for a long time. When it finally spoke, its voice was like distant thunder. Old and tired and full of something that might have been sadness. "Young human, In my lifetime, I have witnessed the end of 1,247 civilizations. Some died in war, some died from disease, and some died when their stars betrayed them, just as the Morvathi star betrays them now. This is the natural order of the universe. Stars are born, stars die, and sometimes the children of those stars die with them. It is not cruelty. It is simply the way of things. The way of things, Alara repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. The way of things is to stand by and watch billions of innocent people burn. The way of things is to accept that which cannot be changed or will not be changed. The Ulmori did not answer. High Arbiter Thesson raised one crystalline limb, calling for order. The Council will now vote on the human proposal for intervention in the Kepler-22 system. All those in favor of mobilizing a rescue operation indicate now. Silence. Not a single delegate moved. All those opposed? 12 lights flickered to life around the chamber, one for each elder species. Each one a rejection of everything Alara had asked for. The motion fails unanimously, Thesson announced. The Council offers its condolences to the Morvathi people and suggests that Ambassador Vance focus her efforts on helping them achieve peaceful acceptance of their fate. Alara stood very still. She looked at the datasphere behind her, at the dying star and the doomed world. She thought about the 3 billion people who were looking up at their sky right now, wondering if anyone in the vast universe would come to save them. And then she thought about what it meant to be human. No, she said. The word was quiet, but it cut through the chamber like a blade. Theson's crystalline form flickered with surprise. I beg your pardon. Alara lifted her chin and looked directly at the Council, at these ancient and powerful beings who had decided that 3 billion lives were not worth the trouble. I said no, she repeated, her voice growing stronger. You have made your decision, and I understand it. You have calculated the costs and the risks, and decided that the Morvathi are not worth saving. Fine. That is your choice. She took a breath. Then I will do it myself. The chamber went absolutely silent. Several delegates physically moved backward, as if Alara had just pulled out a weapon. The Vethkari's 4 eyes went wide. The Siligarans began clicking rapidly among themselves, and the Ulmori elder let out a low, rumbling sound that shook the floor beneath Alara's feet. It was a sound of warning. It was a sound of fear, because every species in the galaxy knew what those words meant when a human said them. They had learned it through centuries of shared history, through countless impossible situations that humans had refused to accept. Ambassador Vance, Thesson said carefully, I strongly advise you to reconsider. But Alara was already walking toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the silent hall. The humans had spoken, and the galaxy held its breath. The message reached Earth 6 hours after Ambassador Vance walked out of the Council chamber. And within minutes, the entire planet was awake. Captain Marcus Chung was sleeping in his small cabin aboard the Deep Space Hauler, defiant hope when his communication screen lit up with an emergency broadcast. He had been dreaming about his daughter's birthday party, about the cake his wife was going to bake, about the 2 weeks of shore leave he had been planning for months. All of that disappeared the moment he read the words on the screen. Kepler-22 emergency. The message said, Morvathi homeworld facing extinction. Council refuses aid. All available vessels requested for volunteer rescue mission. Report to Prometheus Rising Shipyard for briefing. Marcus stared at the screen for exactly 3 seconds. Then he was on his feet, pulling on his uniform and shouting orders to his crew through the ship's internal speakers, across human space. The same scene repeated itself thousands of times on Mars Colony 7. Dr. Yuki Tanaka was drinking tea in her small apartment when her former colleague burst through her door without knocking. She had not spoken to anyone from the Physics Institute in 5 years, not since they had called her theories impossible and forced her to resign. But now they needed her, and the past did not matter anymore. Your gravitational harmonic equations, her colleague gasped, out of breath from running. Can they work? Can they really stabilize a collapsing star? Yuki set down her tea with trembling hands. In theory, yes. But no one has ever tested them. The energy requirements alone would be, whatever you need, you will have it. The entire resources of Earth are at your disposal. On Luna Station, retired pilots who had not flown in decades reported to the hangars and demanded ships. On Europa, engineers abandoned their research projects and began designing emergency heat shields. On Titan, medical teams packed supplies and headed for the nearest transport hub and in the orbital shipyard called Prometheus Rising. 400 vessels gathered like a fist, preparing to strike a tunnel of the Vethkari Consortium. Watched all of this with growing disbelief. He had been assigned by the Council to document what they called humanity's final folly. His job was to record the humans' failure so that future species would learn from their mistake. He had expected to see chaos and panic and the slow realization that the rescue was impossible. Instead, he saw something that made no sense to him at all. He saw humans volunteering, not just military officers following orders, but ordinary people dropping everything they had to join a mission that everyone knew was likely to fail. Cargo pilots, civilian engineers, medical students who had never seen combat, elderly veterans who should have stayed home. They all came, and they all said the same thing when asked why. Because someone has to. Cathanel found himself standing next to a young human woman in the shipyard's massive assembly bay. She was covered in grease and had dark circles under her eyes. And she had been working for 16 hours straight to install emergency cooling systems on a transport ship. I do not understand, Cathanel said, his translator struggling to convey his confusion. You know the probability of success is very low. You know that many of you will die. The mathematics clearly show that this mission is irrational. So why are you doing this? The woman looked up at him with tired eyes, and for a moment Cathanel thought she would be angry at his questions. But instead she just smiled, a small sad smile that seemed very old for someone so young, because 3 billion people are going to die if we do not try, she said. And I could not live with myself if I stayed home and did nothing. But you do not know these people. You have never met them. They are not your family or your friends or even your species. The woman shrugged. So what? They are still people. They are still mothers and fathers and children who want to live. Does it matter that they look different from me? Does it matter that I will never meet them? According to all rational analysis, yes. It should matter. The woman laughed, a short surprised sound. Then I guess humans are not very rational. She went back to her work, leaving Cathanel standing alone with his confusion captain Chum. Arrived at the shipyard 3 days later and immediately reported to the command center. The room was full of noise and activity, with officers running back and forth, carrying data pads and shouting coordinates. At the center of it all stood Admiral Sarah Wright, a woman with gray hair and steel in her eyes who had been pulled out of retirement for this mission. Chum, she said when she saw him. Good. I need experienced captains. The Defiant Hope is being fitted with Dr. Tanaka's gravitational anchors. You will be leading the first wave into the star's corona. Marcus felt his stomach drop. The corona? Admiral, no ship has ever survived that close to an active star. I know. The heat alone would. I know. Captain. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, seeing the weight of what she was asking in her eyes. She was not ordering him. She was asking him to volunteer for what was almost certainly a suicide mission. He thought about his wife, about his daughter's birthday party, about all the things he would never see again if he said yes. Then, he thought about 3 billion people who would never see anything again if he said no. How many ships in the first wave? 38. All volunteer crews. Marcus nodded slowly. Count me in. Admiral Wright put a hand on his shoulder. Thank you, Captain. Briefing is in 2 hours. Get some rest if you can. But Marcus did not rest. Instead, he walked through the shipyard, looking at all the vessels being prepared for the mission, at all the people who were working so hard to make the impossible possible. He stopped at a viewport and looked out at the stars, at the vast darkness that stretched between Earth and the dying system, where 3 billion souls waited for help that might never come. We are really doing this, he said to himself. We are really going to try to fight a star. Behind him, Dr. Yuki Tanaka's voice answered, Yes, we are. And we might actually succeed. Marcus turned to find the physicist standing there, her arms full of data pads, her hair a mess, her eyes bright with something that looked like hope. Your theories, he said. Are they going to work? Yuki was quiet for a moment. I do not know. I have spent 10 years developing these equations, and everyone told me they were impossible. But the math is sound. If we can deploy enough gravitational anchors in the right configuration, we should be able to create artificial gravity wells that will slow the star's collapse. Should be able to? Science is about uncertainty, Captain. The only way to know for sure is to try. Marcus looked back at the stars. And if it does not work, then we will have tried, Yuki said softly. And that matters. That has to matter. Cathanol, who had been watching from the shadows, recorded everything he saw and heard. He still did not understand these humans, but he was beginning to realize that understanding was not the point. These small, soft creatures with their short lives and their irrational emotions were about to fly into a dying star to save people they had never met, and they were doing it because they believed it was right for the first time in his long career as an observer. Cathanol felt something he could not name. It might have been respect, or it might have been the beginning of hope. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler-22 system, and for a moment, every person on every ship simply stared in silence at what lay before them. The star was dying, and it was terrible to see. It filled half the sky. A swollen red monster that pulsed and writhed like a living thing in pain. Massive solar flares erupted from its surface and reached out into space like burning fingers. Radiation alarms screamed on every ship as the computers struggled to calculate just how dangerous the environment had become. And there, orbiting that dying giant, was the small blue world called Morvathos. Prime Captain Marcus Chun stood on the bridge of the Defiant Hope and forced himself to breathe. All ships report in. Confirm status. One by one, the voices came back. 400 vessels had made the journey, and 400 vessels were ready to begin the impossible task of saving 3 billion lives. Admiral Wright, Marcus said into his communicator. First wave is prepared to begin corona insertion on your command. The Admiral's voice came back steady and calm. Acknowledged, Captain. Dr. Tanaka, are the gravitational anchors ready? Ready and programmed, Yuki replied from her station at the back of the bridge. We need to deploy them in a specific pattern around the star's equator. The timing has to be perfect. If we are even a few seconds off, the whole thing falls apart. Then we will not be a few seconds off, Marcus said. First wave. Follow my lead. Everyone else, begin evacuation procedures on the planet. We buy you as much time as we can. The 38 ships of the first wave broke formation and turned toward the star, their engines burning bright against the darkness. Behind them, the rest of the fleet descended toward Morvathos Prime, where 3 billion people were about to learn that they were not alone in the universe on the surface of the planet. The Morvathi had given up hope. They were tall beings, merely 7 feet in height, with skin that shifted colors based on their emotions and eyes that could see far into the infrared spectrum. For thousands of years, they had built a beautiful civilization on their world, creating art and music and science that would have amazed anyone who saw it. But none of that mattered now. Their son was dying. And no one was coming to save them. The great leaders had already begun composing the final songs, the traditional melodies that the Morvathi sang when a life came to an end. Only this time they were singing for everyone, for their entire species, for every dream that would never be dreamed and every child that would never be born. And then the sky filled with ships. Sergeant Maria Torres was one of the first human Marines to touch Morvathi soil. She landed her dropship in the central square of the planet's largest city, surrounded by thousands of Morvathi who stared at her with expressions she could not read. "Hello," she said, her voice amplified by her suit's external speakers. "My name is Sergeant Torres, and I am here to help you. We do not have much time, so I need everyone to listen carefully." An old Morvathi stepped forward, his skin flickering between colors that her suit's computer identified as confusion and disbelief. "You are human? The humans have come?" "Yes, sir. We have ships waiting in orbit to take you to safety. We are going to get as many of you off this planet as we can, but the Galactic Council said no one would help us. They said it was impossible." Torres smiled inside her helmet. "We are not very good at listening when people tell us things are impossible." The evacuation began immediately, with human Marines directing crowds toward landing zones, while medical teams treated the sick and injured. It was chaos, pure and simple, with millions of people trying to move at once and not enough ships to carry them all. But the humans did not stop. They worked through the heat and the radiation, through the earthquakes that shook the ground as the planet's core destabilized, through the ash that fell from the sky like gray snow. They carried children on their backs and pushed elderly Morvathi in makeshift wheelchairs. They gave up their own food and water and did not complain. Meanwhile, far above the planet, Captain Chun led his ships into the heart of the dying star. The Defiant Hope screamed as it entered the corona. The temperature outside the hull reached levels that should have been impossible to survive, and the ship shook so hard that Marcus had to grip his chair to stay upright. Hull integrity at 60%. His engineer shouted, "We are losing heat shields on the port side." "Keep going." Marcus shouted back, "Deploy the first anchor." A small device shot out from the Defiant Hope's cargo bay and vanished into the plasma storm. For a moment, nothing happened, and Marcus felt his heart stop. Then Dr. Tanaka's voice came over the communicator, filled with excitement. "It is working. The gravity well is forming. Deploy the second anchor now." Ship after ship released their anchors, creating a chain of artificial gravity wells around the star's equator. The plan was working. The star's collapse was slowing. And for one beautiful moment, Marcus allowed himself to believe that everything was going to be okay. Then the Valiant exploded. 1 second, it was there, flying beside the Defiant Hope. The next second, it was gone, consumed by a solar flare that had erupted without warning. 47 people, gone in an instant. Valiant is down. Someone screamed. Tomorrow's Promise is reporting critical damage. Chennai Star is losing power. Marcus watched as 2 more ships vanished into the fire, their crews dying so that strangers could live. He wanted to cry. He wanted to scream. He wanted to turn around and fly away from this terrible place. But he did not. "All ships maintain formation," he said, his voice steady even as tears ran down his face. "We still have anchors to deploy. We are not done yet." On the planet below, Sergeant Torres heard the reports from orbit and felt her stomach clench. They were losing ships, losing people, and there were still so many Morvathi left to save. A small Morvathi child approached her, looking up at her with eyes that glowed in the infrared. "Why are you crying?" The child asked. "I can see the heat of your tears through your helmet." Torres had forgotten that the Morvathi could see heat. She wiped her face even though the child could not see the gesture. "I am not crying. I am just sweating through my eyes." The child tilted their head. "That does not make sense." "No, Torres admitted. I suppose it does not. Now climb on my back. I'm going to carry you to the ship. Why are you helping us? The child asked as Torres lifted them onto her shoulders. You do not know us. Torres started walking toward the landing zone, moving as fast as she could through the crowd of refugees, because that is what humans do. We help people who need help, but you might die. Torres did not answer. She just kept walking, carrying the child through the ash and the heat toward a ship that would take them to safety above them. The sky was on fire, and humans were burning with it, but they did not stop. They would not stop, not until the job was done, or until there was no one left to do it. Yuki Tanaka stared at the numbers on her screen and felt her heart break. It is not enough, she whispered. We slowed the collapse, but not enough. Admiral Wright stood beside her on the command ship, her face a mask of controlled grief. How much time did we buy? 6 hours. Maybe 7 if we are lucky. And how much time do we need to evacuate everyone? Yuki closed her eyes. At least 30 hours. Probably more. The mathematics were cruel and simple. They had slowed the star's collapse, but they had not stopped it. In 6 hours, the star would reach critical mass and explode, destroying everything in the system. And in 6 hours, they could only evacuate about 60% of the population. That meant 1.2 billion people were going to die. Admiral Wright was quiet for a long moment. Get me a channel to all ships, her voice echoed through the fleet, reaching every human ear in the system. This is Admiral Wright. I will not lie to you. The situation is bad. We have 6 hours, and we do not have enough ships to save everyone. By every reasonable calculation, we should begin withdrawal now and save what we can. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was different. Harder and softer at the same time. But I did not come here to be reasonable. I came here to save people. So here is what we are going to do. Every ship that can fly is going to make as many trips as possible. We are going to push our engines until they melt and our hulls until they crack. We are going to fill every inch of cargo space with refugees. And then we are going to find more space we did not know we had. Some of us are not going to make it. I know that. You know that. But every single one of us knew that when we signed up for this mission. So now I am asking you, not ordering you, asking you. Who is willing to fly one more time? The response was immediate. Every single ship in the Funberg fleet reported ready for duty. What followed was the most extraordinary 6 hours in human history. Cargo ships that were designed to carry freight dumped everything they had into space. Food, water, personal belongings, anything that weighed more than a few pounds went out the airlock to make room for more refugees. Crews gave up their own quarters, their own supplies, their own safety margins, just to fit a few more people on board the Defiant Hope, crippled and barely flying. Made 3 trips into the danger zone to pick up refugees. Captain Chun's crew had to wear emergency suits the entire time because half the ship had lost atmospheric integrity, and the engine room was so hot that the engineers had to rotate out every 10 minutes to avoid heat stroke. One more run. Chun kept saying every time someone suggested they withdraw. There's always room for one more on the surface. The evacuation became a controlled chaos of desperation and determination. Sergeant Torres found herself in a hospital filled with Morvathi, who could not walk. The building was shaking from the earthquakes. The ceiling was starting to crack. And there were at least 100 patients who needed to be carried out. We do not have time, her lieutenant said. The last transport leaves in 20 minutes. Torres looked at the patients, at the fear in their eyes, at the way they had already accepted that they were going to die. Then we move faster. Grab a patient and start walking. Sergeant, the math does not. I do not care about the math. Torres shouted. I care about these people. Now grab a patient and move. The Marines moved. They carried patients on their backs, 2 at a time when they could manage it. They ignored the pain in their muscles and the burning in their lungs. They made it to the transport with seconds to spare. And every single patient made it aboard. Meanwhile, Cathanal found himself trapped on one of the last evacuation ships. He had intended to stay on the command vessel to complete his documentary, but circumstances had forced him onto a transport that was now desperately overloaded with Morvathi refugees. The ship was designed to carry 200 passengers, but there were at least 500 people packed into every available space. The human pilot came over the speaker system with a grim announcement. "We are too heavy. We cannot reach escape velocity with this many passengers. I need 50 volunteers to give up their seats." Silence fell over the ship. Every Morvathi looked at their neighbors, at their families, at their children. No one moved. No one wanted to be the one to stay behind and die. Then a human crew member stood up. "I will stay." Another human rose. "Me too." And me. One by one, the human crew began volunteering to give up their places. Not just the adults, but the young officers, the technicians, even the ship's doctor. They all stood and offered to stay behind. Kithnal watched in disbelief. "What are you doing?" "You will die." A young human woman, barely more than a child herself, smiled at him sadly. "There are children on this ship. Morvathi children who have their whole lives ahead of them. I have already lived 23 years, which is more than many people get. That is enough." "It is not enough." Kethnal protested. "You have value. Your life has meaning." "Yes," the woman agreed, "and the meaning of my life is what I choose to do with it. Right now, I am choosing to make sure that child over there gets to grow up." In the end, the pilot refused to let his crew sacrifice themselves. Instead, he pushed the engines beyond their limits, burning fuel that was supposed to be reserved for landing, gambling everything on a single desperate maneuver. The ship escaped. They all escaped. But not everyone in the fleet was so lucky in the final hour. When the star began its death throes and the radiation levels became truly lethal, Captain Chun made his final run. The Defiant Hope was barely holding together, with half its systems offline and the other half failing. But there was still one more group of refugees waiting on the surface. "Captain, we cannot make it back," his navigator said quietly. "If we go down there, we will not have enough power to escape the blast." Chun looked at the data and knew his navigator was right. The numbers were clear. This was a one-way trip. He opened the channel to his crew. "Anyone who wants to get off, the escape pods are fully functional. No one will think less of you. This is not an order. Not a single person moved. Then let us go save some people." The Defiant Hope descended through fire and ash, landed on a surface that was cracking apart, loaded its final cargo of 300 Morvathi refugees, and somehow, impossibly, made it back to orbit. Captain Chun did not survive to see I died at his command chair, hands still on the controls, steering his ship through the final moments of the star's collapse. His last words, recorded by the ship's computer, were simple. "Tell my daughter I am sorry I missed her birthday, and tell her I love her." When the star finally exploded, 400 human ships had entered the system. 312 made it out. The others stayed behind, their crews buying precious meds for refugees to escape. Their sacrifice written in fire across the sky. 1.2 billion Morvathi had been calculated to die that day only. 300 million did 90% of the population survived. Evacuated in 6 impossible hours by humans who refused to believe in impossible, and in the ships fleeing the supernova, packed with refugees and survivors. Cathanal finished recording his documentary. He did not know what to call it yet, but he knew what the final scene would be the image of a dying ship called Defiant Hope, flying into the light of an exploding star, carrying 300 souls to safety and the last words of its captain, speaking of love.